Hi, I'm John Cardillo, and I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about what's really happening in Ferguson, who's really behind it, and explain to you how it's not just because of a police shooting, but in reality, it's a coordinated effort by some pretty large groups with a civil unrest agenda. So I started looking at this right at the beginning of the protest, right after the Brown-Wilson shooting incident. And this guy, DeRay McKesson, quickly became one of the most prominent on social media. I'm going to call him a social justice warrior third generation. So McKesson starts to own this movement on Twitter. He's joined by a guy named Sean King. Now, Sean King, who's also a third generation social justice warrior, specializes in fundraising using GoFundMe and other internet type fundraising mechanisms. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of questions about where the money goes with Sean King, but we'll come back to that at another time. McKesson was early on coordinating with all the usual suspects: Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and I'll explain how Louis Farrakhan comes in a second. As we start to look at McKesson and the new breed of social justice warrior, we find that they're coordinating with the usual suspects in the mainstream media, most notably Wesley Lowery from the Washington Post, Charles Blow from the New York Times, Melissa Harris Perry from MSNBC, and Michael Eric Dyson, a writer, far left, ideologically similar to the rest of these guys. But as you dig a little deeper, you start to find something a lot more sinister. Let's go back to November, right after the grand jury came back with no true bill, no indictment on Officer Wilson. SEIU, Service Employees International Union, which we know is not just a union, but a pretty far left radical organization, puts out a press release encouraging people to go to a Get Out the Vote effort held by the National Action Network, which is Al Sharpton's group, in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, a union you would think would try to at least appear to be apolitical, but not SEIU. SEIU admits their bias, they're far left, they're promoting NAN's Get Out the Vote event. They do the event, everybody shows up that you'd expect to show up. Sharpton shows up, his local chapter president. But what's really important is a guy named Akbar Muhammad speaks, and speaks for quite a while. And he's the son of Elijah Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam. So now you have, with regards to Ferguson, National Action Network, Nation of Islam, and SEIU working together to fan the flames. That Get Out the Vote effort then results in a rally in Washington, D.C. Again, all three groups show up, but something interesting happens there. DeRay McKesson, who really got the Black Lives Matter, hands up, don't shoot, hashtags trending, who really drove this entire movement on social media, is shunned by Al Sharpton. He's told that he can't speak at the rally because he didn't obtain VIP credentials. Reports say that National Action Network went as far as to cut the microphone off of some of McKesson's grassroots followers. So then we find a rift between the new generation and what I'll call the Generation 2 of the social justice warriors. Generation 1 I consider the real guys, the legitimate guys: Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey. They were the people doing it for the right reasons. Version 2 came along, Generation 2, and started to pervert, politicize, and profiteer off the movement. All the while this is going on, our sympathetic media is fanning these flames. So it really never mattered if DeRay McKesson and Al Sharpton got along. Our friends here, they'll fan the flames for all of them as long as those flames go against the grain, as long as those flames push the agenda of the far left. Now, who's this guy? This guy's really interesting. Several months back, I see DeRay McKesson tweeting at, coordinating with this guy, John C. Muhammad. John C. Muhammad was a city official in Upland Park, Missouri, maybe 5 minutes out of Ferguson, I think 4.8 miles out of Ferguson. John Muhammad is also a devout member of the Nation of Islam who tweets in concert with the Jefferson City chapter of the Nation of Islam. Here's where nuance becomes important. Around the same time, Farrakhan gives a speech. In the speech, he talks about teaching children to throw Molotov cocktails during civil unrest. He also refers to Ferguson as Jefferson.
These young people in Jefferson, they're not afraid of no tanks. Ferguson, yes. What did I say? Yeah.
Too coincidental for my comfort, considering that John Muhammad, who claims that the recent shooting of the Ferguson police officer was a false flag attack by the KKK coordinates with the Jefferson chapter. Why would Jefferson be Farrakhan's point of reference unless he was getting reports back from the field? Something to keep an eye on. Let's move over here. Who are these guys? Well, you know Method Man from Wu-Tang Clan, which had a song, PLO Style. This is a guy, Basim Masri, well-known Palestinian sympathizer, agitator, civil activist. And this woman, her name is Rania Khalek, and she is a journalist about the world. Now, they all have their own theories on what happened in Ferguson with regards to the shootings of the police officers. Method Man says, you reap what you sow. I don't care that the police were shot, too bad. Not a really nice sentiment from a mainstream musician. Masri feels that it was a false flag, that the KKK or white supremacists shot the cops. And Khalek feels that the shooting was actually intended, the rounds were actually intended to hit the protesters themselves. So all three of them are blaming it on anybody other than the 20-year-old black male shooter, Ferguson protester who was caught for the shooting. In their minds, these are all white supremacists, the perpetrators rather are white supremacists, KKK members, or Israeli agents. Conspiratorial, kind of nutty stuff, that's what they feel. But how do all these people get to do all this stuff? Who pays for it all? Because they're coordinating efforts halfway across the United States, thousands of people showing up. It's our buddy George Soros. As far as we've been able to track through his Open Societies Foundation and Drug Policy Alliance, Soros has trickled down $33 million that we know of into keeping these protests going, into keeping the civil unrest going. And the hierarchy breaks down in what I frankly find a pretty scary way. Al Sharpton and his National Action Network are the political and PR arm. Nation of Islam is the muscle, and they bring in their friends from the Black Panther Party. And SEIU is organizing it. So they find the people to put on the buses. They make sure they get there. They act as protection. And they actually find the buses and make sure that those buses are full and make their way to the site of protest. And when you put all of this together, you see that you have a concerted effort by anti-Americans, communists, terrorist sympathizers to stir civil unrest in the United States. Now, knowing that Farrakhan over the years has taken hundreds of millions, if not billions from Libya, it's really not that much of a leap to assume that ISIS will eventually understand they should be capitalizing on civil unrest in the United States. They've already got a sympathetic party in Farrakhan. They've already got an army to help them spread their message. And coming down the road, I'm going to be doing a little bit more research on prison converts to Islam and how that will eventually tie in and they'll become the foot soldiers. But for the time being, do your research. Get the word out. Social media algorithms being what they are, only about 1/10 of content is seen by the intended recipients. So stay on this content and don't just tweet your content at one media personality who's ideologically similar to you. Tweet it at 10 or 15 that you can find. Blog it on your own. Share it with your friends. Do what you can do to get the word out because the mainstream media is not reporting this story. Again, I'm John Cardillo, and thanks very much for listening.